So, creative artists, photographers, videographers, you don't know what to charge. This video is going to help you
pricing your photography, how much to charge for your work.
Today we're going to talk about pricing. I'm going to explain to you
the tricky issue of pricing your work. Now, this is something I think
I'm going to talk a little bit about day rates, kind of like how you charge or what you charge.
We're going to be talking about actually what to charge for your photography and video projects.
I figure out how to charge somebody a long time ago.
You should charge for your photography services.
How to price your professional photography. So many videos on YouTube already about this, from channels big and small. And even though I agree with some and disagree with others, I find that I haven't found one that addresses everything to do with pricing your work, from figuring out how much to charge to putting together a professional estimate to show your clients. So today, I'm going to try to consolidate all of that into one video, and hopefully this is the last video you ever need to watch about this. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is part 2 in a series of business-related videos I'm doing for photography. Part 1 can be found right here, which talks about the creative brief. The creative brief is a document that the clients will give to you initially when they first approach you, which describes the kind of photography they're looking for. And you have to understand that creative brief, dissect it, ask the right questions back to the client to come up with the right numbers to put into an estimate to present back to them. I hope you find the information useful enough to watch the entire thing. The thumbnail about the free money is true, quote unquote. That's later on. But I hope that you find it useful and you give it a like and you subscribe to my channel, because that's what the whole point of this is to share my information from my experience with you over the 20-something years of me shooting professionally. Now, an estimate or quotation that is put together in a professional way can make or break the job. Case in point, long ago I had a quotation to make bidding against another photographer for the same job, and I was awarded the job only because the client revealed to me later on that my quotation and my documentation was more detailed, put together more clearly, and that made him feel that I had a better understanding of the job at hand, even though my numbers were higher than the other photographer. So this is ultra important. I have been making estimates for over 20 years, and I like to think I'm pretty good about it, but I am not a certified accountant nor lawyer, so everything I talk about is based on my own personal experiences. Another thing is that, except for one major difference, what I talk about today applies to any type of photography business. Whether you shoot high school portraits, babies, all the way to commercial work, it all applies to you the same way, except for one thing, and I'll talk about that one big thing later. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get into it. What is an estimate? In its most fundamental form, an estimate is a document that you can either make as simply from an Excel worksheet template all the way to a fancy piece of software made for photographers. I use one called BlinkBid, but there are many of them available. Most of them are subscription-based, some of them are free, some of them are geared more towards the business-to-consumer businesses like family portraits or high school portraits or weddings, and others are more geared for commercial work. So BlinkBid is a bit more commercial side, but I've used it for years and I think it's fine. So an estimate is a document that is generated by Excel or these softwares that contains not only your pricing, but also detailed information about the photo shoot. Your name, your contact information, your client's name and contact information, a very detailed description of the job, and also terms and conditions, all packaged into one estimate that becomes a binding document once your client signs it, to show that both sides are committed to this job and you're ready to start working. Okay, so computer's right here. Let's hop onto that and first talk about the formula on how to calculate your pricing. It's a very basic formula. Some of you may know it already, but basically it's about the total, which is the grand total at the bottom of your estimate, equals fees plus expenses. And expenses in photography lingo is also known as production costs. Now, production costs are basically costs that you incur as a photographer to make the production happen. So it could be anything from venue hire, location rentals, rental equipment, transportation, food and drinks, hiring assistants, post-production, which is basically either retouching or video editing if you're hiring those services out, pre-production, which is any planning ahead of time, whether you need to hire someone to help you with that, or whether you're looking for locations. All of that planning stages can be viewed as an expense if you're hiring people to help you with that. At the bottom, I put something called the bottom line. Now, the bottom line is how everything that we're talking about in terms of fees, expenses, numbers, how does that relate to you as a human being living in society, paying your way to live? Okay? I think that's important to talk about the business, but also talk about how the business pays for you to live. So I added the bottom line there to kind of put some reference and make it more relative and easy for us to understand. Okay? So for expenses, really, the money that you pay to make a job happen, you have to get reimbursed for that. Now, it can be done in two ways. The ideal way is to get a deposit or an advance from your customer, your client, up front before the job starts, so you can pay for all of these things up front. And the good thing about that is that a lot of these suppliers, your suppliers, whether you're renting equipment or renting a location to get a permit or buying food and drinks, all of those suppliers need to be paid on the spot. So there's no time to wait until the photographer gets paid and then pay them. So it's really great if you can get an advance from your client to pay for these things up front. Otherwise, you're going to be a bank and you're going to be, holding these things in your books, which is very bad for cash flow. The other way is to bill your client at the end, wait for them to pay you, and then pay these people, which, doesn't really work that well, and it really interrupts with cash flow. So best thing to do is to get a deposit. Now, in the bottom line section, I put it as null because this money comes in and it goes out, so the net effect of it is zero. Now, the net effect is basically, you can also say profit or loss. And we're not losing money here, we're not gaining money, so it's just zero, okay? Okay, your photographer's fee. This is probably the highlight of the video. Comment down below if you have problems figuring out what to charge. Remember in the beginning when you saw all the other YouTubers talking about their ways of coming up with their photographers' rates? I agree with some of their points. What I don't agree with is that they only focused on certain points and missed out on other points. And what I think is the most important thing is to combine different ways to figure out your price. You can't just use one or two or three. I came up with four, and I think you have to combine and consider all four factors to come up with your rate. Now, another way of looking at this, and this is something another photographer taught me when I first started, and I still kind of use to today, is instead of just looking at a rate, which is a very arbitrary thing, use something called your overhead plus your cost of doing business. And that is this section right here, down at the bottom line, where you first figure out what it costs for you to live as a private individual. So your rent, your car, your utilities, your cell phone bill. You realize that most of these are billed to you on a monthly basis, so that's fine. Let's use the monthly basis, and on top of that, add what it costs you to run your business on a monthly basis as well, which could be your office or studio if you have one, your taxes and your utilities on top of that. All those things added together will be a number, and I think that number is different for everyone. But let's, for example, say that the total of all of that costs you 5,000 US dollars, and we're using US dollars because it's common and popular as an example. Let's say it costs $5,000 for you to just break even on that every month. So we can consider that a goal. You have to make that every single month just to break even, okay? Now, still, that doesn't help you figure out your rate, because obviously that doesn't mean that if you get a job shooting for someone, your photographer fee per day is 5,000 US dollars. That's too much. So it's going to be less than that. That's when you start factoring those 4 points that I just mentioned. And the 4 points are this. Number one is the quality of your work. Now, this is going to be very subjective, but in order to make it a little bit more objective, of course, use your own opinion and what you feel, but also important to ask other people, honestly, people you trust, and also a good idea if they know a thing or two about photography and the business side of photography too. So another photographer would be great, but only I suggest someone who's not a competitor, because their answer may deliberately skew you off in a different tangent. And just ask them something basic, like on a scale of 1 to 10, where will they rate your photography compared to your competitors in your city or town, okay? That will give you a good indication. And your own opinion is probably a gut feeling, so you can cross-reference that with what other people are saying. Combine that with experience. Now, that's just working in the business side of things. How can you negotiate with clients? Are you good with that? Can you deal with them and talk their language? And can you go on set and produce on set and command a set full of people to make the production run smoothly and on time and within budget? How much experience do you have on that? Because if it's just based on sheer talent alone of being a good versus bad photographer, and you don't factor in your experience, you kind of need to do that as well, because they kind of play off each other. Best if you can be really talented and have a lot of production experience or business experience, but one will offset the other somehow. On top of that, also, depending on where you live, figure out how much your competitors are charging. And also look at their work as well. Bounce your quality of work versus theirs. And that will give you an indication whether you can charge more than them or less than them. Some people say just figure out what they charge and then you charge something similar. That doesn't work, because what if you're a better photographer? Or what if you have more experience than they do? That comes into play. And finally, figure out how much your clients are willing to pay, because that is also going to be a judge on whether or not they will hire you. If you are a really talented, very experienced photographer, but you go into a market like I did when I moved to Hong Kong from Canada 10 years ago, I realized that due to the fact that my competitors were charging ultra low rates, I was actually about 10 times higher than my competitors were. And my clients weren't willing to pay that big of a discrepancy. So I had to lower my rates, but not so much to match theirs. I just needed to make sure that the rates that I charged, which were more than my competitors, had the quality and experience to kind of justify that rate. So going back to the $5,000 as an example, I would say that if you charge within maybe $800 to $1,000 or $1,200 as a day rate for your shoots, that may be a good start. But obviously you don't know how many days per month you will shoot. I think that is the ultimate question that no one really knows. As a freelancer, you don't know when your next job is going to be. But you would know what your goal is, $5,000 per month. And as you start, if you're just starting this business, you will likely lose money in the beginning, because you have no experience and you'll be charging lower rates than your competitors. But you can build on your talent and keep building. And at the end, you may be short of that $5,000. But in the beginning, I would say it's ultra important to keep your overhead and your cost of doing business as low as possible, so that goal is easier to reach. So hopefully you will continue shooting, improve your work, get more jobs, improve your experience, all that stuff, and eventually you will reach your break-even point. You will match it. And that's great. Of course, keep going. Now, if you can consistently surpass your break-even point of 5,000 or whatever that number is, you have options. You can either start paying yourself a monthly salary if you're incorporated, or reinvest back into the company, upgrade your internet, maybe buy a new computer, stuff that's needed, or do a bit of both. So the whole point is still to net zero. Now, you might be wondering at this point, if my objective in my expenses is to break even and net zero, and the same goes for my fees, how can I make money? How can I earn a profit and save? So here comes the next part, and this is that one thing I mentioned earlier, where this model works for any type of photography business except for that one thing. Here's that one thing, and that is usage and licensing your images. This is a baffling thing for me that so many professionals or so-called professionals are not doing. In my book, a professional photographer is not only someone who's good at photography, in the business of photography, but can actually turn a profit in photography. If you are a great shooter and you have a photography business, but you're losing money or you can't save, that is not really that professional. And if you are paying for your cost of living and overhead one way, break even on expenses another way, you have to find a way to make money. And I don't know why so many people don't do this, but licensing your images is the only sure way to make money in photography. Now, this is a concept that is quite common in the advertising and marketing world, but it should be for any type of photography business whose clients are other businesses where they use your images to make money for them. So it could be something as small as a restaurant, a barber shop, their businesses, all the way up to doing a major ad campaign for Nike, for example. Every one of those types of jobs command usage. So I know some of you may be wondering, well, I shoot weddings or high school portraits. I cannot charge usage, right? Correct, you cannot charge usage. So what happens then? At that point, you would be charging something extra on top of your photographer's fee, which is your saving portion. You don't tell anyone, you don't itemize it on your estimate, but it's built in there, it's buried in there. So you still have your break-even number, whatever that day rate is, and then you add on top of that a few $100, I don't know what it is, but that is your saving portion. But make sure that when you get paid, you will take that money out and save it, okay? Still with me? Good. Let's finish this thing off. So we've done the kind of the theory of the formula. Let's put all of that into practice by applying it to a real estimate. So we have a real estimate here from Audi, and they wanted 2 photographs done. So sometimes they don't actually send creative brief. They might just send an email with some reference photos that were done somewhere else by someone else, and they wanted something similar. So that's what they did this time. And the 2 images are these 2, right? So it's a job for 2 photographs for final delivery. And it's a blue car and a yellow car, and they wanted a quotation on how this is done. So when I first received this in the email, I treat it like a creative brief, and I still have to ask all the relevant questions so that I fully understand what they want. So just to give you a recap of what happened there, they wanted a very similar looking and feeling type of image with these 2 cars in these 2 colors. And they just wanted to switch the location to somewhere that's more local to our city in Hong Kong versus the backgrounds that they used in these 2 photographs, which I would assume is somewhere in the US, judging by the road signs. And that's fine. So we figured out that they wanted the reflections. They had a lot of concern about the reflections on the car, and they wanted it brilliant and glossy, just like you see here, but also wondered if we should actually shoot those in a studio and then key the car into a separately photographed background. And when I first heard that, I thought that it wasn't the right course of action. We should just shoot the cars live at the actual locations. So also I had to ask, for example, in this first shot up here, if they wanted to use extras in the background or just hire some talent on the side. They said no. That's just a reference from this photo. We don't need any talent on our job. The second shot is a motion shot, so we had to figure out that if this is going to be done in the city, we have to find a location that allows us to place the car in the road for an extended period of time so we can shoot it properly for the motion. So that's also a concern. And at this point, we don't know what the locations are yet, and we don't know how much they cost, if they charge at all. So a lot of things are still up in the air. So I can show you how I prepare an estimate based on these unknowns as well. It's quite simple, really. So let's get into it. The estimate is multi-paged. It starts off with the preliminary information. Is usually just details. And then you get into the numbers after that, and then you get into the terms and conditions after that. So let's go through each page one by one. The very first part of page 1 is the logo, my contact information, and URL and my email address, just as a starter. And then below that, the contacts information for the company and the estimate number, which is generated by the software that I use, and the estimate date. Of course, I'm blurring out the privacy details. Below that is the job name. So every job has a name, and this is the name that we've chosen for this job. And below that is a description. Now, basically, the description is a reiteration of the email that he sent me and the discussions that we had after that, all kind of condensed and summarized into what we decided to do. So this estimate will be based on those decisions that we made, and the numbers that you see later on only apply to those decisions and these reference photos that they supplied. So I write all that out and I say 2 key visuals, which is basically 2 key images. One for the facelift Sportback, which is this one, the blue one, and the sedan, which is the yellow one in the bottom. Tone and mood as per supplied reference received October 4th, 2016. So I reference the email that they sent me just to show them that this estimate only refers to those details in that email. If there's any changes further on, that requires a new estimate and voids this one. Client to supply both vehicles, vehicle transportation, detailing, prep, showroom license plates. These plates that we use here are often fake and we just make them to stick on the car because they look better. And agency PO plus 50% of total sum required to start pre-production. I always add this in because a deposit of 50% or 30% or 60%, whatever it is, helps with my cash flow so that if they pay me some of this money up front, I can pay all my suppliers in the expenses section that we just talked about previously. An agency PO, that is a purchase order. That is a document that the client makes for their use internally for themselves as just a reference to acknowledge that they have set aside some money for a photo shoot. And when I provide an estimate, if they have a PO, they can give me that PO number. It's just like a invoice number or estimate number. And I can enter that PO number into this estimate. So when I give it to the client, they can reference and cross-reference everything that this estimate shows this PO number, which relates to this job that we're doing. So they can just keep all their documents interlinked on their side. It really doesn't do anything for me, but it's nice to have. I only consider a job confirmed when the estimate is signed and they either give me a deposit or a purchase order number. And only then do I consider the estimate to be valid and the job is confirmed. Otherwise, I really disregard anything and I assume that the job will not go ahead. Shooting to occur by latest October 19th, otherwise after November 4th. This is only for this particular job because I was going away between these two dates, and I wanted to let them know ahead of time just so that they know that we should either start shooting as soon as possible or we have to wait until after November 4th. That's just for this job. Otherwise, I don't normally need to put this in. Moving along is the usage license. So this is the key thing that we talked about earlier, and all the parameters of each license determines the usage rate that I charge them. So the main keys to consider are the duration, which is in this case a year. The quantity is not really that important anymore, but that just basically means how often will this image or images be used during the course of that year. Not really that key anymore. Exclusivity is important. If it's an exclusive license, that means that this client is the only company that has the right to use these images during that 1 year period. The other option is non-exclusive, which means that during that 1 year that Audi can use this license, I can also sell these images to another company and make more money that way. But generally, that doesn't really happen anymore. Most of the licenses are exclusive, and only the client that's paying me has the right to use them, so they can keep it to themselves and not see the same images on another ad by a different company somewhere in the world in the same time. That really is failed advertising when you do that. If it's an image of a product, usually it has no value other than to the client themselves, to Audi themselves. Like BMW will never buy this image to use because it's not a BMW. So usually it's exclusive by default nowadays. The region is, in this case, Hong Kong only, but it could be Asia Pacific, it could be Japan, it could be USA, or it could be global. So global licenses command the highest fees, and regional have less fees. So in this case, it's a regional usage. And media is, in this case, all media, which includes all digital, all print, and all TV, if there's any TV placements. So if this still image would be inserted into a TV commercial, that would be considered TV. I don't really see them doing that for this, even though they wanted the flexibility of being able to use it in any media. Realistically, I don't see it happening. They usually use it for digital, social media, and maybe print, but most likely not print. Moving along is the estimate terms. Now, the estimate terms are a specific set of clauses that only relate to this estimate. There are another set of terms at the end of this estimate that covers the entire job and all the documents related to the entire job. But these estimate terms here only relate to this document. So there are two different types, two different sets of terms. This one only specifies things like this estimate is valid for 7 days from the date of issue. Usually I give them 14 days. In this case, because I was going away, I needed them to make a decision much faster. So I gave them 7 days just to kind of move their ass a little bit and get them to hurry up and make a decision. Now, if they change any of the parameters of the creative part of this job, say we want to add another shot somewhere, or we want 2 shots per car, so 4 in total, something like that, it voids this estimate completely, and you need to restart a new one, and also reset the clock on the 14 or 7 days for the validity of this estimate. So you might think 7 days is not enough time. It usually is enough time for them to either A, cancel the job, B, change the parameters of the job. Either way voids this estimate, and we need to either start a new one or the job's canceled and we don't move forward anymore. So it's actually enough time usually, and like I said, 14 days is my norm. If they do confirm the job by, like I said, signature and deposit or PO, and they cancel afterwards, I lay down the structure of the cancellation fees. So when a job is confirmed, I start working. And when I start working, I may be starting to pay money for that job to hire people, book them, confirm them, or even start paying deposits for locations, for example. If they cancel the job after that, and I've already spent that money, I need to recoup that back. And also, I've already booked my time. So if they cancel, depending on how far ahead they cancel, my cancellation fees change. The closer they cancel to the actual shoot date, the higher the cancellation fees. And that's the first page. Let's move on to the second page. Now the second page is all the nitty-gritty numbers. So I itemize everything and separate everything down the list. And most of what you see here is the result of the discussions I had with the clients. So the names that you see here, like insurance, location, props, all that stuff, are categories that only relate to this job. Like I said, you won't find models here because we decided we're not hiring talent for this job. Therefore, there's no makeup artist and there's no wardrobe stylist as well. So let's go through each of them quickly and let me show you how we break everything down. So the first one, let's go with location because that's the easiest. We haven't figured out the location yet. So what I do is I point out that we haven't figured it out. Right now, the cost of locations is 0 because we have no idea where we're shooting. We could be shooting at a free place, or we need to pay a venue to rent their space to shoot. We don't know yet. So it's TBD, is to be determined. Traffic diversion equipment, I was a bit generous here for $400. Again, this is US dollars, just to get equipment and things to help divert traffic in case we would be shooting in a live traffic area, which the second motion shot probably commands. So we need to have some equipment there to help guide traffic around us. And props is the same thing. We don't know what we may need yet, but I've set it aside to show them that this area is still missing and we may or may not need to fill it. If I don't put it here, they may overlook it later on down the line. So at least they acknowledge that these things are still missing at this point. It also shows them that I have a good understanding of this job, that I've already considered these things. It kind of gives them more of a confidence in my understanding of the job. Next thing is retouching. Now retouching, I hire my retouchers and Photoshop artists externally. So for me, that's considered an expense. If I did my own retouching, I would include that into the fee section. But most of the subsections you see here are expenses. And there's only one section of fees, and that's my photographer's shooting fee. So in this case, $1,250 US per image is, I would say, not the highest globally. I would say normally a very good retouching house would charge about $2,000 an image US. So $1,250 is not, it's still above average, I would say. But I think it's the right rate for this quality that I expect for this job. So 2 times that is $2,500. And that includes processing and data management and archiving. So you may think that storing an image in your hard drive in perpetuity costs you nothing, but it does. It costs you hard drive space, and over time, you need to buy new hard drives. So these little bits and pieces add up cumulatively over time to help you afford the extra storage that you need in the future. Crew. So I have producer, production assistant, and 3 assistants listed here. Just to give you a quick rundown what a producer does. A producer is a high-ranking position in the production of the shoot. So if I, as a photographer, manage all the creative side of the job, a producer handles all the finance and the logistics of the job. Unbeknownst to most people, photographers are also producers without knowing. So if you were to shoot a small job, or I used to shoot a small job, I would also be the producer and figure out the budgets and the schedules and line everything up so that we're all efficient and plan the shoots ahead of time. That's a producer's job. Most photographers are doing that as well. Sometimes if the job is big enough or the client expects tasks to be separated to more people, like as in this case, I would assume the position of only photographer, only taking care of the creative side, where I would hire a producer to handle all the money and the hiring of other people and the time management and schedules and locations, and just to make sure the job runs smoothly and we have everything we need on everyone we need. And sometimes a producer may need an assistant as well to help them, because there's a lot of things to juggle, and that's included as well. The 3 photo assistants are for me. Usually with car shoots, they're big, bulky things to maneuver. Having more people on set is just easier. And from a cost perspective, the cost of an assistant is a small price compared to the overall budget. So having an extra pair of hands is well worth it. Moving along to equipment. Now, here's something I need to consider about gear. I think it's a misconception that a lot of people expect a photographer to own a camera. It's not true. I never believed in that. And more so, they expect the photographer to supply the use of that camera for free. And that's also a misconception. Sometimes I would rent gear, and the clients have no problem paying for that if that's needed. But that's from an external rental company. But what about my own gear? I should be charging them for that as well. After all, they're paying for everything that's needed to make those images happen. The equipment of camera and lighting, even though I own it, it's still part of that production. So I should charge for part of that cost of that gear towards the production. Obviously, I don't expect them to pay for the entire camera or entire piece of item, but a small percentage of it. Just like the hard drive space I just talked about, it's a small percentage of everything that adds up over time. And that allows you to upgrade your equipment down the line, because as we all know, equipment nowadays especially has a limited lifespan, especially cameras. So we need to upgrade them quite often, every 1 or 2 years. So someone needs to pay for that. And these small charges, I won't call them rentals. What I call them is just camera package, lighting package. I might even add the word basic into that, so that they know that if we need anything more advanced, it'll cost more money. So a DSLR package will be something for this shoot, $400. But if I needed to shoot medium format for some reason, then that would be a higher camera package rate. But I really encourage people to start charging for their own gear, even though you own it. Transport. We need to get to the location and back, carry all the gear and the people. And where I live in Hong Kong, we have these kind of great services, kind of like Lyft or Uber, but they're guys who own their vans, and they provide a service where they drive you wherever you want to go, and they stay with you on location the entire day. So you have a private van and driver. It just helps me not worry about driving my own car, figuring out where to park, where am I going to get a ticket or not. All these things, they drop us off, they leave and find a place to chill for the entire day, or if the location doesn't let them stay there. And if we need them, we just call them and they come right back. Move along to miscellaneous. Craft services is just food, drinks. Craft is usually used in the way where you hire a catering company and they will come and provide and serve you. Maybe I shouldn't have used that word, but it's just basically food and drink money. We buy our own food and drinks. Expendable supplies, always add that in, because you'll be using consumables like tapes, things that you use and throw away. So that adds up over time. So you charge a little bit for that, just to help you recoup the costs. Insurance is essential. Every photo business should have their own insurance that covers the equipment and the principal owner of the company for public liability. But if you're hiring out like assistants, people in your own team for a specific shoot, you may need to add on top of that insurance policy to cover them as well for that 1 or 2 days of the shoot. It doesn't cover the clients, because they should have their own insurance. It doesn't cover the insurance of the car, because that's their responsibility. So it's just to cover yourself and your team. Now let's jump to the fees. Don't forget the 4 criteria and factors in determining your own fee. Your experience, your quality of work, your competitors' rates, and what the market is willing to pay. I have settled into a range that starts from 1,500 US to 4,000 US per day. And in this particular job, I quoted for $3,000 per day. And that's also based on the complexity of the job. So within the range that you figure out for yourself, you also have to figure out where in that range applies to particular jobs. And in this case, I have to factor in addition, the type of client it is, the expectations of the client, what kind of quality of work they expect. So all of that kind of works into an exact number from that range. So in this case, the $3,000 was, in my mind, the right fit for this type of job. Now, if you look at the remaining part, is also usage. And usage, I calculated it to be 2,500 US per image, so 5,000 total. Now, how did I come up with this number? I use a calculator that's available online that anyone can go to, but there's a caveat related to that. The calculator is quite simple and easy to use, so I'll show that to you right now. It is made by the Association of Photographers in the UK. So everything in this calculator is based on the British pound, so you have to do a conversion. So in my case, the 3,000 per day is actually about 2,300 pounds. And that's what you enter as the BUI, which is what they call the base usage rate. They're still a little bit unclear about what the base usage rate is and how to determine what that number is. But most photographers that I've talked to just use their day rate for the photographer's fee and enter that. So in my case here, 3,000 US is 2,300 British pounds, which is what I enter here. And then you just enter in these spaces down here, all the specifications of this job. So for example, I set the license to 1 year. I set the media options to all media. And I set the territory to Hong Kong only. And it gives you this number, which is 5,520 pounds per image, okay? So the caveat here is that you can't just take this number on face value alone. It's way too high. It's often every single time I've used this calculator, it always generates a number that's exorbitant, like it's just crazy high. So what I've done, I have to further refine this number down to something that's more manageable and realistic. So the first thing I do is I chop it in half. So 5,520, I cut that in half, which in this calculator is divide by 2, that's 2,760 pounds. And then I further reduce that a little bit. 2,760 pounds is $3,584 US per image. So I further reduce it down by, in this case, about, what, 20% to get to 2,500 US per image. Now here's the best part of this video. I saved it until now because we're talking about usage again. And remember that thumbnail that clickbaited you to watch this video? It's not a lie. There is free money involved, and that's because of the usage. And I have to reiterate how important usage is in charging for it, because this usage charge or licensing fee that you charge your clients is not only a one-time fee. It can reoccur over time, and you can get paid again over time. And that's where this quote-unquote free money comes in. It happens quite often. To me, it's happened many times where after the year is over, or that term that you agreed on for the usage is over, the client may want to reuse your image again for another year. And this is a year down the road already. So you've already forgotten about the job, all the hard work and, sleepless nights and the sweat and tears that you put into this job, that's all forgotten. I could be sitting in a coffee shop a year down the road and I get a phone call or an email from that client saying, hey, remember that shot we did a year ago? Well, we liked it, so we like to keep using it, and the usage license is about to expire, so can we renegotiate a new license? Sure. It would be for maybe another year, which in that case would be a bit less than the first year charge, because the most impact for usage happens in the first year, and then subsequent years you charge less, but it's only like maybe 15–20% less than the first year. So in this case, by example, if I charged $5,000 for 2 images for usage for 1 year, the next year maybe $4,500 if that happens. But that's like free money. If you are a year down the road and you've forgotten about the job and you get a phone call or email and they want to reuse it, that feels like you just won the jackpot because you did no work for it, no extra work. So that's how important charging usage is. If you don't charge usage in the beginning, you have no chance on charging usage down the road. So this can reoccur. And recently, like a month ago, I just got usage for a year from a client that paid me roughly 3,000 US. And right now I'm also working on another extension for usage for an image I shot 2 years ago for a global. So it's a big one, it's 5 digits. So, you know, these things happen again and again, but you gotta charge usage. And this is one of the best ways to make a profit as a photographer. So we're in the home stretch. This is the last point, which is the terms and conditions, otherwise known as the fine print. We don't like to read these things, so I'm not going to go through every single point, but it's just good to know that these points are there, these clauses are there to resolve any disputes that may happen if poo-poo does hit the fan and we need something to reference to resolve the problems. So these T and C's that I have, I downloaded from somewhere long ago, I can't even remember, and they're available to you to download as well. But what I did is I modified them to suit my business when I first downloaded mine, and I suggest you do the same to revise it to fit your business as well. So I did make some modifications and added a couple of clauses which I want to point out to you, which I think are important. The first one is about art direction, which is number 9. It's key that someone from the client side is there to represent the client. Most important, that this person should be able to make decisions on set because you're working with them. You can check with them, is this lighting right? Is the model pose here okay? Is what he's wearing, is that okay? You know, like making these decisions along the way will save you from having potential problems after the shoot is finished, because once it's finished, you can't change a lot of these things. So having a key personnel from their side on set working with you is quite important. And now this clause defends you that in case they don't provide anyone on set, then you are deemed to absorb the role of the art director as well. So you make all the decisions and those decisions are final. So that brings you to the next clause that I added as well, which is number 6, is about reshoots. So what the reshoot says is that if there is a need for a reshoot, who pays for that reshoot? And this clause states that if the reshoot was the result of negligence on my part, say I screwed up on something, then I pay for it. But if it's because the client saw the images and changed their minds about something, then they pay for it because I, up to that point, did nothing wrong. So these clauses I added just to protect myself, to make clear what is involved going into these shoots. So that's it. We're done. Thanks so much for watching. Again, this was a big one, and I don't think I'm going to do another big one like this anytime soon, at least say that. I really hope you found it informative and that you used these suggestions that I offered. If you like what you saw, please subscribe again and like and hit the notification bell. But more importantly, please try to share it with others if you find this one useful. And I really appreciate that. And hopefully this will be the last video of this type that you need to watch to learn about pricing and how to make estimates. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.